It simulates pathways countries can follow to reach the targets they set. Outputs from the tracking tool allow monitoring progress towards 2025 as new data become available. The outcomes will also feed into the global monitoring framework for maternal, infant and young child nutrition, the Global Nutrition Report, and reports from other global initiatives like the Sun Movement and the UN Zero Hunger Challenge.
Adequate nutrition, beginning in early stages of life, is crucial to ensure good physical and mental development and long-term health.
Countries around the world need to strengthen their nutrition surveillance to monitor progress. Because what is measured gets done. The World Health Organization, UNICEF and the European Commission present the tracking tool. In 2012, WHO member states endorsed 6 global nutrition targets for improving maternal, infant and young child nutrition. By 2025, the global targets are 40% reduction in the number of children under 5 years who are stunted, 50% reduction of anemia in women of reproductive age, 30% reduction in low birth weight, no increase in childhood overweight, increase the rate of exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months up to at least 50%, reduce and maintain childhood wasting to less than 5%. These global targets highlight key priority areas that must be addressed to alleviate the double burden of malnutrition in children, starting with the earliest stages of development, so that optimal nutrition and health can be achieved. They also provide a benchmark to measure achievements, identify gaps and trigger corrective actions, and estimate global resource requirements. The translation of the global international targets needs to consider countries' nutritional profiles, risk factor trends, demographic changes, experience with developing and implementing nutrition policies, and health system development. Countries have to make sure that they invest resources to strengthen surveillance systems to be able to assess their nutritional status, adopt multi-sectorial approach for setting their own targets, and maintain commitment for tracking and monitoring progress towards the targets. WHO's Department of Nutrition for Health and Development and partners have developed a web-based tracking tool to assist countries set targets and monitor progress. It complements existing tools on nutrition interventions, impact and costing. The tracking tool displays countries' updated, comparable data. For each target indicator, it shows status at the baseline, recent trends, and what the target would be if the global target definition was applied. For each target, the tracking tool allows exploring scenarios taking into account the time left to 2025 and different rates of progress. Users will be able to assess, for each of the selected scenarios, the corresponding country's contribution to the achievement of the global targets. The what-if analysis depicts the progress needed to meet the target versus a selected trend scenario. It simulates pathways countries can follow to reach the targets they set. Outputs from the tracking tool allow monitoring progress towards 2025 as new data become available. The outcomes will also feed into the global monitoring framework for maternal, infant and young child nutrition, the Global Nutrition Report, and reports from other global initiatives like the Sun Movement and the UN Zero Hunger Challenge.
already. And so the two.
Is there anywhere for me to...
Good evening, everyone. I think we will start. I know not everybody has arrived, but I think it's time to start. So my name is Jacqueline Côté. I'm the Director of Public Relations here at the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies. And I know you have a very long evening of presentation and discussion, so I will only say a few words to welcome you. For those who are regular attendees, nice to see you again. And for newcomers, I hope you will enjoy our brand new facilities. We are really particularly pleased to host this event of our Global Health Program, given our commitment to engage with policymakers, with international organizations, with, of course, academics, and other stakeholders on global issues. And, of course, global nutrition is one of those issues. And we are very pleased that we have been able to convene this meeting this evening. And it also fits very well with our mission to be a platform for debate and forward-thinking reflection. I would like to, in particular, thank the co-organizers of this event, the WHO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, and the UN System Standing Committee on Nutrition. And I would like to also say that I find it very nice that it follows an event that we held with the FAO in October on Food for Talk, which was done in the context of ICN 2. So it is really my pleasure now to hand over to our friend Professor Kickbush to moderate this discussion and then to introduce the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and welcome also to all of you from my side. My name is Ilona Kickbusch. I'm the head of the Global Health Program here at the Graduate Institute. And we're delighted to be hosting this event because if we consider the statement of the Secretary General, who said 2015 is the year of development. This is the year where we will take many incredibly important decisions on financing, on goals, on direction. Those of you that were up at the WHO got a feeling for that as well in terms of health security issues. So it's an incredibly important year. And as we also know, none of the issues we're tackling, whether they're health issues, food issues, security issues, whatever, we cannot tackle them alone. They need to be tackled in partnership. And what I really liked about this report is the back page, which sort of gives you a feel for the complexity of the undertaking. And that's why it's also very symbolic that we will now have introductory remarks from Xiangyun Yao, who is the director of the Food and Agricultural Organization Liaison Office here in Geneva. It speaks for itself. WHO can't work on nutrition alone. It needs its partner in the UN system. And we're very pleased to have you here. Please, your welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much to ladies and friends of mine. And I'm Xiangjun Yao, as introduced by my colleagues right now. And I'm very delighted to represent FAO to organize this session jointly with the WHO, with the UN System Standing Committee on Nutrition, and also the Global Health Program of the Graduate Institute. And this is the second time for FAO Lyon's office to have those kind of talk, and particularly in the subject of nutrition. And we all know that nutrition is critical for development, and also nutrition is also critical for the food security and also for the rural poverty reduction. As we commence 2015, it's a great pleasure to launch the year with renewed energy, hope, and conviction to perform better in the area of nutrition. And I have no doubt that we will succeed given the momentum achieved from the International Conference on Nutrition, which set a milestone for strengthening efforts to mainstream nutrition in the post-2015 agenda. So we owe this to the millions of the people, and they are suffering from the malnutrition. And the commitment showed by the global leaders in passing the Rome Declaration and the framework for action in Rome last year is a clear demonstration of this efforts, the joint efforts by the whole global community. And during the SN2, very strong messages were echoed for the need to act to rid our world from the malnutrition. Indeed, it is a very clear call for all partners, including FAO, but also including all the stakeholders, the nations, and also the private sector, NGOs, and academia to act on this course. So to me, this is a very good moment, and also this is a good opportunity for us not only to debate on the needs of what we should do, but also to take the joint efforts concretely into operation. And we all have a lot of challenges ahead of us today. So to say this from the food security perspective and also from the perspectives of agriculture sector, I have to say that we have to produce more by very limited natural resources. And we all know that in the coming decades, the world population will reach around 9 billion. And according to FAO's estimation, we have to increase our food production by 60% by 2050. So in that case, we have to produce more with the limited resources and at the same time to care our natural resources and to care our global in a very nice manner. So sustainability is a big issue for us. But on the other hand, we have to think about the healthy diet and also the nutritious food. Not only the quantity, but also the quality, the safety of the food. And so with this consideration, FAO has been working with many partners, including the colleagues who are present here today. I should name them here: WHO, the Graduate Institute, for example, and also the IFPRI, who will present the report later on. So with all these joint efforts, a global report on nutrition was produced, and it was launched last year during the conference. But this is a good time to present the key findings of this report to the community here in Geneva. And you know that last year, as any other normal years, a series of publications on different subjects, including agriculture, food systems, family farming, forestry, fishery, agriculture investment, so on and so forth. A long list of publications were produced and launched. So some people may question us, why a separate report on nutrition? So to me, the answer is quite simple, because the Global Nutrition Report takes a different and bold angle and approach to urge us all to do nutrition business differently from what we used to do. So from policy to investment planning to programmatic actions and the monitoring for timely corrective measures along the way. The report weaves a convincing story, a story for taking on the post-2015 agenda with confidence, and in many ways points to how ISN2 outcomes should be actioned multi-sectorally and also holistically. So that's the reason, I think, for FAO to get engaged in this publication of a global report on nutrition. So not, does the report reiterate the grim numbers of those affected by malnutrition across the world. It gives several steps further to spur better coherent action and accountability across the sectors, across the continents, across the economies, across also the boundaries and also the contexts. So it shed a new wavelength and ray of hope for achieving global targets in reducing malnutrition. So I congratulate the independent expert group that worked very hard to deliver this report. And later on, our colleague from IFPRI will present this report in more details. So we at FAO and the United Nations family as a whole greatly value the partnership we have with the key players. And also we appreciate the donors who are very generous to give us the support to make this report available to all of us. And together we know beyond the reasonable doubt that going forward, our joint efforts in preventing and eradicating malnutrition and its falseful consequences are set to pay visible and lasting dividends. So we have the science, the knowledge, the tools, the policies to transcend. What we need more are the capacities across the sectors at all the levels to deliver the real services and also to conduct the actions in the ground with the very concrete activities. So in addition, we need very smart and targeted investments to implement those activities and programs were most needed and at the right time. So FAO believes that we all have power in our minds and also on our hands to do more and to make the malnutrition history with all the joint efforts by us. So I thank you very much for your very active participation to this session in advance and wish a very successful discussion that we will have very soon. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Xian Yung, and for giving us this introduction. Those of you that know me know that I have a favorite sentence, and that favorite sentence says, health is a political choice. And I believe the really exciting thing about this nutrition report is that it helps set out those political choices. What has to be done? What can be done and how should it be done? And also who needs to do it? And Xin Yun already indicated some of those key words, those key directions that we're called upon again and again to bring together in 2015. The issue of rights, the issue of sustainable development, the issue of human well-being, and the issue of equity. And it's those four elements that we are continuously called upon whenever we look at any policy. Are they there? Can we check it? Will it move forward? And it's very interesting right at the beginning of the report to read that nutrition is the bedrock of human well-being. And those of you that have read the more or less draft, one doesn't quite know, Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 3, doesn't speak only of health anymore. It explicitly speaks of health and well-being. And it brings together new types of dimensions that I think this report has also been doing. So we heard it was launched first at the conference, the ICN2, but of course there have been and are still going on other launches around the world where this report is being introduced to people willing to act on health and nutrition. And so we are particularly pleased today as well that the keynote presentation on the report will be given to us by one of the authors, the co-chair of the Global Nutrition Report, Lawrence Haddad. He is also a senior research fellow at the Institute for Food Policy, at the International Food Policy Research Institute, that way around. He said, oh, you can say IFPRI, because everyone here will know what it is, but I hope not, because what we're actually hoping is that people who are not just the in crowd have come to listen to the challenges that we have in nutrition. So Lawrence, it's my great pleasure to ask you to give the introduction so that we have a good basis for our panel discussion afterwards. Please.
Thank you very much. The taxi driver that brought me here assured me that it was that building over there, across the street, that I was supposed to give the talk in. That was the piece of paper. I showed him the piece of paper. And so I went into that building, and there were about 3 people milling around in the reception, all with their coats on. And I was ready to give this presentation at the drop of a hat. I was ready to give this presentation without PowerPoints to those 3 people in the lobby, but I'm glad I don't have to. Glad someone rescued me, and I'm here in front of a committed, passionate audience, and I'm being hosted by 4 wonderful organizations. I'd like to thank WHO, FAO, UNSCN, and the Graduate Institute. And this is by far the nicest auditorium I think I've ever given a talk in, so congratulations to that. This, Professor Kickbush said 2015 is a year of development, and that's quite right, but it's also a year of getting nutrition into development. And that's been a big theme of the 2014 report, and will be an even bigger theme of the 2015 report, which comes out in September at the UN General Assembly. I'm going to give you a really lightning fast tour of this report. Tried to make it a bit interesting. I know big reports can be deathly boring to read and deathly boring to sit through presentations of. We've tried to make it lively and not the usual type of report. So we'll see what you think. We've been greatly helped by WHO colleagues and FAO colleagues. I've got a couple of my independent expert group in the audience with me, Mercedes Donis and Patricia Fracassi are here. We've got some of the stakeholder group that have set the broad strategic goals, and Mark, who you'll see later, is one of those stakeholders. So it's been a massive team effort, and I think you'll get that sense. Let me go through it. The report came out of the Nutrition for Growth event, which was in London in 2013, where an extra $4 billion was pledged to nutrition-specific interventions for the 2013 to 2020 period. I think the signatories to that Nutrition for Growth event said, "Hey, it sounds great to commit an extra $4 billion over the next 7 years, but maybe we should have some kind of commitment mechanism to back it up to see whether we're actually doing what we said we would do." So that's one of the reasons for this report. It was set up by that same group to assess progress globally and at the national level on a broad range of indicators, identify actions to accelerate progress, and I think most importantly, perhaps, the biggest value add is to improve accountability in the nutrition system. When I say accountability, I mean my shorthand for accountability is it's the glue that sticks the commitment to the result. You can say lots of things, and it's very easy for that commitment to fade away and be forgotten about and not actually generate any result. But we're trying to connect the two, the commitment with the result. The report really is global. It tries to bring the world of the undernutrition community together with those people who worry about obesity, overweight, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, so the non-communicable disease community. It's written by an independent expert group that I co-chair. It's about 20 people, and that group is responsible for the quality and the accuracy and the credibility and the readability of the reports. If there are any mistakes, it's our fault. Please let me know if you find any mistakes. We've just finished a consultation for the 2015 report about things that people liked about this report and things they'd like to see emphasized more in the 2015 report, and maybe we can get into that later on. There are 60 authors in all, because we have lots of panel writers, lots of people contributing technical notes, so it really is a massive effort. We brought together over 80 indicators around nutrition, nutrition outcome indicators, impact indicators, spending indicators, policy indicators, legislation indicators, indicators about underlying determinants, food, care, health, water, sanitation, spending indicators for all 193 countries. So it's not just the low income and the middle income, it's all countries, because another thing about 2015, another thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is they will be universal goals. They will apply to every country. I think so we thought it was really important that this report also applied to every country. And then finally, the data are all available. Mostly they're national level data that have been put together, refined, made accessible by our UN partners, WHO, UNICEF, FAO, and World Food Programme. They're available on the Global Nutrition Report website. If you just type in Global Nutrition Report into any search engine, you'll find it. And they're easy to get down. They're all in Excel files, and they're in Stata files as well, for any of you who want to run regressions and do fancy statistics. Here are the 7 key messages. First, and this is what I'm going to cycle through, nutrition is a foundation for the Sustainable Development Goals. Having nutrition in the MDGs, we had the underweight indicator in MDG 1, and it was our colleagues in the development agencies and in the national governments tell us it was helpful to have it in there because it gave them an excuse when they had to go and argue for nutrition spending with their bosses and their higher ups. It gave them an excuse to say, look, it's in there, we need to do this. And we want to amplify that in the next SDGs. Malnutrition is a concern for all countries. We found that only 2 countries really didn't cross any red lines on nutrition, and that's China and South Korea. I'll tell you a bit more about that later on. But all the other countries crossed one or other nutrition red line, whether it was stunting, women's anemia, or overweight and obesity. Multiple burdens are the new normal. Nearly 50% of the countries are having to deal with under and overweight obesity. So the days when you could deal with undernutrition, have a little breather, and then begin to deal with overweight and obesity issues, those days are gone for most middle-income and low-income countries. They're having to actually deal with both of these things at the same time. And that is incredibly complex and challenging from a policy and a program perspective and a communication perspective. Progress is slow globally. There's no surprise there. The joint monitoring reporting from WHO, UNICEF, and the World Bank tells us that every year. But behind those global numbers, there's some spectacular country performance. So don't think it's a very static picture. It's not. It's a very dynamic picture. 5, we need more ambition on the targets. This is a conclusion of the team. The 2030 targets will be the SDG targets. The World Health Assembly targets are the 2025 targets. We could just say, let's extend the 2025 targets on a sort of the current trajectory. Let's just extend them out, business as usual, to 2030. But we think that that's too unambitious, and we think the world has changed, and we make the case that we should have even more ambitious targets for 2030. Scaling up is more possible than ever. Scaling up of interventions is one of the ways in which you reduce stunting and wasting and overweight and obesity and women's anemia. If you don't have the programs reaching the very poorest and the most malnourished, you're not going to achieve your goals. But how do you do that? It takes funding, it takes capacity, it takes political commitment. It takes all of those things. But we think we're in a good space for nutrition right now. And the key is to take advantage of that momentum and that space where we are right now. And then nutrition accountability needs strengthening. We think that nutrition has some unique features. It's no one's particular responsibility. Multiple sectors are tasked with delivering it. That means that every sector can say, well, it's not my main responsibility, it's one of my responsibilities, so that's a problem. Sometimes the manifestations of malnutrition are not visible until it's too late. So that's another reason for weak accountability. And then the benefits of, certainly the economic benefits of of reducing malnutrition are only really visible 20 years down the road. So again, that's not terribly sexy for politicians. Benefits in 20 years, they want benefits in the next 3 years. So these reasons we think make accountability difficult in nutrition. So we highlight that and we specify some ways of strengthening accountability. So first of all, we make the argument that good nutrition is a foundation for sustainable development. And this is the quote that Professor Kickbush highlighted right at the beginning of her talk. We run through some of the statistics that are familiar to many in this room, I suspect, but not to the broader development community. This is a statistic from the Lancet series of papers on nutrition from 2013. Bob Black, Zulfi Bhutta, their paper number 1, and 45% of all child deaths under the age of 5, in one way or another, are connected to under 5 undernutrition. That's a pretty shocking statistic. Not too many people outside of this room know that. The UN Health Envoy, the UN MDG Envoy, was blown away by that statistic. So that tells you it's not as widely known as it should be. And that means that of these 18 kids, 7 of them won't get to see their 5th birthday. So it's pretty shocking. But it's also a big there's also a big economic argument as well. And the report does generate some new estimates for 40 different countries. And the estimates from John Hodnott, who's an economist at IFPRI, and has done a lot of work in this area with Sue Horton and Jerry Berman and others. And we construct these benefit-cost ratios. What for every dollar or rupee or peso or kwacha that you invest in scaling up nutrition-specific interventions, what's the return you get from that dollar? Well, if you think if those programs are effective interventions, and those are the ones that the Lancet identifies, if those reduce stunting prevalences, if that in turn makes kids' brains develop better, if that means they learn more in school, if that means they then earn more in the labour market, that has a big positive effect to their families and to their communities and to their nations. And the estimates show that the benefit cost ratios are 16 to 1. That's the median estimate for 40 different countries. Some countries have a lower number, some countries have a number in the 40s and 50s. And the variation in the numbers is because some countries where the ratio is very high, there's a very high return to education in those countries. So it's a problematic estimate, really, because the countries where the education, the returns to improved education are lowest tend to be the countries that are the most deprived. So the benefit cost ratios are higher in the better off countries than in the worst off countries. So anyway, the number is 16. I think Bangladesh is about 16. So that gives you a sense of where certain countries are. Those of you interested in the stock market and who play the stock market in the US, this 16 to 1 ratio over a 30-year period is essentially a compound rate of interest of 10% over 30 years, which is a fantastic investment return, better than the US stock market over the last 80 years. So this is a serious return. It's not just about undernutrition, however. We didn't construct any new estimates, but we scoured the literature to try to pull together all the estimates of the economic costs and consequences of things like obesity. And so here's one number from the report produces many more. Here's one number from the US, which is kind of in the middle of all the estimates. 10% of median income is lost to obesity in the workplace in the United States. And that's due to things like healthcare costs, but also absenteeism and something called presenteeism, which is when you go to work but you're not as productive as you could be. I'm sure none of you know anything about that. We also cycle through the arguments about intergenerational equity. Why do we do that? Because sustainable development, if you think about it, is all about intergenerational equity. What are we going to do in this generation to make development easier or harder for the next generation? And we know that stunted and undernourished adolescent girls will tend to give birth when they give birth as hopefully as adults to babies. They will be more likely to give birth to undernourished babies. If those babies are girls, and when they grow up, they will be more likely to give birth to undernourished babies. And so the cycle goes on unless it's broken. So we highlight the intergenerational equity aspect. So despite highlighting the 45%, the 16 to 1 ratio and the intergenerational equity aspects, we find, and we did this work in June and July of last year. At that time, and still, the draft Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them. They have 169 targets. Only one target out of 169 mentions nutrition at the moment. So there's something wrong with that picture, it seems to me. We make the argument that we as a community, and we as a global community, need to really up our game and intensify our efforts to get nutrition into the SDGs. Why? Well, the MDGs, if you look at the evaluations, they did direct more resources to health. They did direct more resources to South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. The fact that so many people are scrambling to get their issue into the Sustainable Development Goals is one indication that the MDGs matter. The financing summit in July in Addis is going to be all about how do we finance the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really important to get nutrition in there and to not give people, potential investors, a reason or an excuse not to invest in nutrition. I'm really happy to say that the community has really taken this up, and UNICEF and SCN and WHO and colleagues in the US and around the world, in Ethiopia and Guatemala, have really come together, and we've highlighted, we've summarized 8 indicators that we think should be in the SDG set. The 6 World Health Assembly indicators, which is the non-negotiable, and then an indicator on women's diet diversity and an indicator on nutrition spending. And I'll explain why the nutrition spending one we think should be in there. I don't know if the UNSCN has managed to print out any of those 1-page or 2-page documents. You do. We have them. Thank you. And we have them here. I suppose they're out there as well. We can distribute them. You need to blog about them. You need to tweet about them. You need to write about them. You need to give them to your boss. You give them to your professors. Give them to your director generals, whoever they are. Give them to your country representatives. They need to be in the SDGs. Otherwise we have missed the boat. Now, whichever way you look at the world, the next point that the report makes is that malnutrition affects every country. In fact, the new normal is that 45%, so we're taking a bit of poetic license because the new normal would be over 50%, but anyway, give me a break. 45% of countries are dealing with undernutrition and overweight obesity at the same time. Indonesia, I'm going to Indonesia in a week to launch it in Jakarta. That is the #1 country that's dealing with overweight, obesity, undernutrition, anemia, and nothing is really getting better very quickly. So we need to see malnutrition in multiple dimensions. When we think about interventions, we need to think about, is our intervention to combat undernutrition going to inadvertently worsen overweight and obesity? Is our intervention to deal with micronutrient malnutrition going to do something inadvertently bad to overweight and obesity? And you've seen that with social protection in Central America and Latin and South America. Some of those social protection programs have actually increased. They've reduced underweight, low weight for age, but they've inadvertently increased overweight for under fives. So we have to be really cognizant of these trade-offs and the complexity. We can't let complexity be an excuse to do nothing. We know that policymakers really hate the word complexity. How many of you have been in a policymaker's office and they say, tell me the one thing I should do? And I always say the one thing you should do is build commitment. The one thing you should do is make a commitment to reduce stunting, reduce wasting, because once you've made that public commitment, your colleagues and your nation will figure out how to do it. But every country will have a different pathway, and there are multiple pathways. So there's no one solution. This makes it more complicated, but to me, that means we need to be more strategic and even more aware of the sequencing and the priorities of actions. The world is off course for these 6 World Health Assembly goals. WHO has produced these estimates back in May, I think, of 2014, Mercedes and her team. So there's no surprise there, but there are some interesting numbers behind the global numbers. 69 countries are on target for one or more of these global targets. If these global targets were applied at the country level, how many countries would be on target for one or more of them? Well, 69 would. So that's encouraging. However, 31 countries are on course for none of the targets, which is quite discouraging. There are only 100 countries there because we didn't have data to track the World Health Assembly targets for a large number of countries. Interestingly enough, mostly the high-income countries, who, despite the World Health Assembly goals being universal goals that all 193 have signed up to, a lot of the rich countries' data sets are not compatible with the World Health Organization global data sets or the UNICEF data sets. So that's one of the things we're trying to do more work on for the 2015. The UK, Ireland, Canada were not very happy with all the black spots in the report, but that's the point. If it didn't spark a response, we wouldn't be doing our job. Many countries are making great strides forwards. Under 5 stunting, under 5 overweight, and exclusive breastfeeding. I've just highlighted these here. Don't have enough time really to give you all the numbers, but I've highlighted these here because they have a rapid decline, and for exclusive breastfeeding, a rapid increase in the rates of these things. But they're also starting from a very unpromising position. So it's not just the countries that are already doing well that are progressing quickly. It's countries that actually 15, 20 years ago were doing really rather badly. Ethiopia, I think, had a 59% stunting rate 15 or 20 years ago. Now it's down to it's the low 40s, I think, is the latest estimate. That's pretty impressive. Still really high, and the Ethiopians would be the first to acknowledge it's much too high, but pretty impressive. And when good things align, we have lots of case studies in the report. And when good things align, when we know what to do, when the funding is there, when the commitment, the political commitment is there, when the coverage rates are higher, and when the underlying trends, food security, water and sanitation, women's empowerment, poverty reduction, when those things all come together, really extraordinary things can happen. And we highlight the example of Maharashtra, which is a state in India, second biggest state in India, over 100 million people. If it was a country, it would be the 12th biggest country in the world. So it's not a trivial example, if you like. It's a really massive example. Stunting fell from 37% to 24% in 7 years, I think between 2005 and 2012. And we did a case study to say why was that, and it's actually a series of rather modest improvements, but critically across the board. So not in just one area, they were across the board. So in poverty reduction, some kind of all average poverty reduction rates for India. So not higher than average, but not lower than average. The state declared a nutrition mission, which is when the chief minister, the head of the state, says, we are going to provide a special fund, special administrative procedures to make nutrition improve rapidly over the next 5 to 10 years. They improve program performance. Various indicators of ICDS, those of you who know India, the Integrated Child Development Scheme, improved its performance. They did some really basic things like recruiting frontline nutrition staff. Vacancy rates for 50%. In 2005, they reduced the vacancy rates to 15% by 2012. Basic things. Nutrition spending went up from 1% of the state government budget to 1.5%. So a 50% increase, but from a low base. But all these things made a massive difference. I talked about the nutrition context being highly dynamic. Don't think that the apparent global stasis is an indicator of a non-dynamism. We find that the context is highly dynamic. New data are coming on stream all the time that are really encouraging. New modeling exercises, new funding is coming through, and new commitments are coming through all the time. The Sun movement has been a fantastic rallying call for countries. The numbers are increasing all the time. I'll show you some numbers on spending in a second. And it's because of this dynamism, and it's because of the relatively recent existence of this dynamism, sort of in the last 4 to 5 years, we feel that the targets for 2030 should be more than mere extensions, more linear extrapolations or business as usual extrapolations of the 2025 goals. Programs need to be scaled up. If we're going to reach more ambitious goals, or even the WHO goals, nutrition programs need to be scaled up. And scale up is possible. And here, again, no particularly fancy analysis in this report, I have to say. The data analysts that we hired to do this work with me were a little bit disappointed at the end of it. They said, we didn't run one regression. We didn't do one cluster analysis. We didn't do one decomposition analysis. Well, it's just about presenting data that we already have in slightly different ways. And here you have 8 different interventions or practices that you could classify as nutrition specific. They're explicitly designed to improve nutrition. And these arrows just show they don't show the growth in a particular country. They show the range of coverage rates that different countries have for each of these interventions. So, for example, the one on the left is iron folate supplementation in pregnancy for more than 90 days. We know this is an important intervention to improve birth outcomes. Nicaragua has a 79% coverage rate for this intervention. I won't name the country that has a 0.1% coverage rate, but that's the range, from 0.1 to 79. I should have put in the number of countries for each intervention. I'll do that for the next presentation. Malawi has 95% coverage for early initiation of breastfeeding. Rwanda has 85% exclusive breastfeeding. These are all from DHS mix data sets that are routinely collected, not routinely collected enough. If you could put together performance across the board on these 8, that's at the upper end of these arrows, you'd have an impressive jolt, an impressive thrust towards reducing stunting and wasting and women's anemia. So what you see is certain countries do well in certain interventions in terms of coverage, but not well in other interventions. And of course, this says nothing about quality. This is just coverage. But it's not just about nutrition-sensitive interventions, specific interventions. We know from the Lancet estimates that will get us 20% of the way. We know we have to rely on other sectors to weigh in for nutrition. To do that, the report stresses that we need to speak their language. We need to tell them in agriculture, in education and health, in women's empowerment, in social protection, in water and sanitation, what do they need to do and why is it in their interest to do it? They're not just going to do us a favor in the nutrition community. What should they do to make their programs even more nutrition sensitive? Now, if they're doing their job well, they will have a big impact on nutrition. So we're not diminishing that. We're just saying if you want to have a bigger impact, it may be in your interest to do this, and if it is, you'll have an even bigger impact on nutrition. We collect all the evidence and all the literature that says this is what you need to do to make your ag program more nutrition sensitive. It's all out there, we just try to bring it together. But we make the case to the nutrition community that it's really important to do this. Why is it important to do this? Because I think our tendency is just to stick to things we know, things that are easy to do, nutrition-specific interventions. It's uncomfortable. It gets us out of our comfort zone to talk to people in other sectors. But it's worth it because there's a lot of money in these other sectors. So here are some government budget data analysis from Africa for 2010. Could have done the same thing for Asia. Didn't want to clutter the graph up, the slide up. What you can see is that 35%, the non-grey segment, 35% of government spending is on these sectors that are really helpful and useful for nutrition. Agriculture, education, health, social protection. If we can make some of that spending become a bit more nutrition sensitive, then again, we can really motor on towards meeting those goals. We end on accountability because we think accountability, as I said, is rather weak in nutrition, and it's really important. It's too easy to make commitments and then not live up to them. The ICN2 in November had some great commitments. We need to make sure those commitments are followed up on and lived up to. So one of the first things we looked at was, can we identify nutrition budget data? Can we identify governments that have readily available and readily accessible data from their budgets on how much they're spending on nutrition? So we couldn't find hardly any. In the report we said there was just one. After the report was sent off for printing, we found 2 others. I'm quite shocked by this. People say, what was the most surprising thing for you, Lawrence, about the report? And I think this is one of the most surprising things. I thought we were going to find 10 or 12 countries that actually had this data readily available. These 3 countries have managed to do it with help from organizations and movements like SUN. We're going to be working with SUN and I think with SAVE as well, Save the Children, to try to increase this number for the 2015 report. So the point here is that these commitments are untracked, but they are eminently trackable. Don't have to use the tripwire here is don't use the same method for every country, because if you use the same method for every country, you'll be making the perfect the enemy of the good. Let's just get some numbers out there and refine them as we go along. We also, remember that 4 billion I told you about, extra money that was pledged in the London summit in 2013? Behind that 4 billion were 168 specific commitments. We did an assessment of all those commitments. We wrote to the 100 signatories. We said, this is what you said you would do. Tell us what you've done in the last year and a half. So we didn't, and they told us, and we had to take it at face value. If they said something completely silly or completely unbelievable, we went back to them. If they said something completely vague and non-specific, we went back to them. But there are only so many times you can go back to 100 organizations in a sort of a 4-month period without killing yourself, basically, losing the will to live. So this is what we ended up with. 43% of the commitments we judged, the independent expert group judged, were on course. 9% were off course. So that's quite good in terms of a ratio, about 4-to-1 on course to off course. However, 37% it wasn't clear, either because the commitments were spectacularly vague or the responses were spectacularly vague. And some people really knew how to write a commitment they would never have to live up to. Some CSOs, civil society organizations, were really earnest and really had very smart commitments, specific, measurable, accountable, etc. And they fell just short, like 97% short of an incredible commitment, and we had to say they were off course. And some other organizations made these really feeble commitments. You know, we will talk about nutrition in the next 10 years kind of thing. And they said, we've talked about nutrition in the last year, so we're on course. And so that's a flaw in the methodology. We're trying to figure out how to fix that. We'll be doing something similar with Francesco's group at WHO and Anelati's group at FAO on the ICN2 commitments. We've gone through all the statements that were made in Rome by all the dignitaries. We've identified things that look like commitments, things that could be commitments, and things that definitely aren't commitments. And we won't be able to track them for the 2015 report, but we will go back to those people who made those commitments and say, this is the commitment you made, how are you going to track it? So we'll have a preliminary analysis of that with FAO and WHO, of course. We also got some numbers from the external donors on nutrition spending, and I'm sorry, Chair, I'll speed up. I'm going slowly. We got some numbers from the external donors on their nutrition spending. They did this in an exercise for the Sun movement through gritted teeth, I think. The nutrition-specific stuff was quite straightforward because that's how spending on nutrition is reported to the OECD DAC, the Overseas Development Assistance body that collects all the aid data. But the nutrition sensitive, you know, how much of your agricultural programming is nutrition sensitive, that's difficult because you've got to go through every project in agriculture in the UK or in France or in Canada. You've got to go through every project and make a guess, a transparent guess, but a guess. This project, 25% nutrition. This project, 0. This project, 100. So they did that, and they found that there was a 30% increase in nutrition-specific spending between 2010 and 2012. Those are the latest data we had at the time. And nutrition-sensitive spending has gone up by 19% for these 13 donors. Some donors much higher than that, some donors pretty static, but nearly all of them went up, actually. So that's good. That's the good news. The bad news is it's from a very low base. It's still a very small amount of money that's spent by the external donors on nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific. So the big blue circle is the total overseas development assistance from 2013, $135 billion. The nutrition specific external donor spend was $500 million, and the nutrition sensitive was $1 billion. So just over 1% of the overseas development assistance, specific and sensitive, goes to nutrition. Again, contrast that with 45% of under 5 deaths, in one way or another accountable to nutrition. Contrast that with a 16-to-1 benefit-cost ratio. Something's not wrong with that. Something's not right with that picture. We kind of skirted the whole business issue, really, in the 2014 report. We just didn't have the time. This is such a contentious area. When is business? When is there a consensus about the role business can play to improve nutrition? And let's be clear, 60%, 70% of economic activity is from the business sector. So why would we want to restrict all our public health efforts in nutrition to just the public sector? That's crazy. We may have to tread more carefully and be more cautious and have more regulation and more transparency and accountability. Actually, you just want the same in the private sector as you have in the public sector. You don't want to give the public sector a pass either. We wanted to find out, we want to do this exercise. What's the consensus? Where are the big areas of disagreement? How can you make the consensus areas bigger? How can you minimize the disagreements? We didn't have time to do that. So we basically said, sorry, we don't have time. We're going to do it in the 2015 report. And I've been in touch with several of you about this for the 2015 report. And we're going to do more on this. The Sun Business Network were really helpful in following up on the commitments that the businesses made at the Nutrition for Growth event, and there were quite a few, and in general they were on track as well, although there were a lot of no responses and a lot of you can't tell, it's not clear. A little bit more than some of the other groups, but pretty much in line with governments, pretty much in line with some of the other CSOs. So we're going to do more on businesses. We talked a lot about civil society and how important civil society is for accountability, and we rifled through some of the methodologies that we can use that have been used in other sectors. Health has done a lot of work those of you who are health experts will know there's a lot of work around citizen accountability in health, citizen scorecards, participatory budgeting, social audits, community scorecards. Not much of this has been tried in nutrition, and we call for more innovation and more experiments in nutrition. We talk about data. We talk about a nutrition data revolution. In the independent expert group, we said, is it an evolution or is it a revolution? I think in the end, the revolutionaries had it by a whisker. We think there needs to be a step change in the way we collect data, the amount of data collected, and most importantly, the quality and of data and the capacity to actually analyze it. So, we didn't just sort of say this, we tried to make a case for it based on the data we had. And so here are some glaring nutrition data gaps. 49% of the countries out of the 193 don't have enough data. That's either they don't have the indicators or they don't have the targets to assess if they're on or off course for 4 World Health Assembly indicators. We couldn't do it for the 6 because we only had enough data for the 4. But nevertheless, even restricting it to 4, half the countries couldn't tell us whether they were on course or off course. And 40% of the most recent child growth surveys are over 5 years old. And again, you wouldn't run an economy on data that are over 5 years old. Why on earth would you run a nutrition strategy on data that are over 5 years old? It's just not responsible policy. The independent expert group, 20 people, 20 different views on where the biggest data gaps are. There was some consensus around these issues: food consumption, low birth weight, anemia, financial investments in nutrition. Program coverage data were really quite weak. For the Lancet, 10 interventions. And the stock of capacity. Again, we don't really know much about the capacity. I'm trying to get, for the 2015 report, I'm trying to get an assessment of nutrition, of National Statistic Office capacity, not in nutrition, just generally. And I can't find it anywhere. I've talked to the UN National Statistics Office and they don't have anything. The World Bank doesn't have anything. It's just really, really weak data. So finally, recommended actions. Embed nutrition more strongly in the SDGs. This is it for the next 15 years. We need to get on board this bus. Develop more ambitious 2030 targets. I think I've made the arguments for that. Embrace the complexity of multiple burdens. The Lancet series was fabulous, but it did lead to the impression that countries have to do all 10 of these nutrition-specific interventions at the same time. They don't have the capacity to do that. So sequencing and prioritization, I think, is really important. And the complexity story makes it even more important. Relentless focus on coverage of nutrition-specific interventions. Those of you who are in the child survival, child health, child welfare world will follow the countdown to 2015 for women and children. They've been going for about 10 years. They're a related, similar accountability mechanism, and they have a relentless focus on program coverage because they say this is something that governments can really affect, and we know that as coverage goes up, making assumptions about quality, that if they're effective interventions, that the things we care about will improve. 5, find resources outside health for nutrition-sensitive interventions. There's a lot of money out there. 35% of African government budgets are spent in these areas. My guess would be 1% of government budgets in Africa are spent on nutrition. Do I need to say more? And 6, invest in a nutrition data revolution. There's been some studies coming out of the Copenhagen Consensus. I'm not a massive fan, actually. Please don't tweet that. I'm not a massive fan. I can explain why later on. But this paper I read, which was costing the SDG data collection, came out with a really preposterous estimate that used ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, as its denominator, and said 12% of all overseas development assistance would be spent on monitoring the SDGs. What a waste of money. Well, of course, the number was wrong. And why would you have ODA as your denominator? National governments should be the ones primarily collecting this data and spending and investing in this data, not DFID and Finland and Switzerland. They can help, but they're not the ones who should be collecting it and investing in it. So this paper is just completely wrong. I wrote a blog on it about a month ago. Please read it. It's Development Horizons, if you're interested. And then finally, be accountability champions. If you want others to be accountable for their actions in nutrition. You yourself have to be accountable for nutrition. You have to make a commitment, make it completely transparent and identifiable. You have to set in place mechanisms to track that commitment. You have to open yourselves to assessments that say, did you meet that commitment? You have to make yourself open to saying what you're going to do about the assessment. Did you meet the commitment or not? If we're not accountability champions, we can't expect anyone else to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And without further ado, can I ask the panelists to come up here and join Lawrence? The way we're going to progress now is to have very short focus statements from our panelists who will represent different dimensions of action and what needs to be done. And then we're opening up the floor for you to give statements, ideas, commentaries, or ask questions. And then to end, we will have a presentation from the WHO about some further technical issues that will need to be addressed. Now, in terms of not liking the Copenhagen Consensus, at the same time, the guys at the Copenhagen Consensus said one of the best investments you can make if you want to promote development is address stunting. So, okay, they got the number wrong, but still, it is a message, and we can get into dialogue with them to say, how do you present it correctly as an investment, because it definitely is an important one. We've asked each of the speakers not to use any PowerPoints and to give us 3 key messages. And we thought we'd start with Sirpa Helja Sarlio Letenkorva from Finland. And of course, Finland is, should I say, the poster girl of health in all policies, very strong at cooperating at the national level and also taking that message into the international arena. Very important conference there about a year or 2 ago on health in all policies. And Sirpa is going to speak to us about the importance of political will and the role of government. Sirpa.
Thank you, Ilona, and thank you for inviting me to this very, very interesting event. And first, I would like to really congratulate WHO for the excellent report, and that really shows the challenges we are facing and the opportunities, and also for the previous speaker for the nice presentation. Although I must admit that I feel a little bit nervous now that you said that you are going to trace all the commitments made in ICN2. I was there and I was very active, and I kept thinking, what did I promise? So, but I'll get back to that.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Okay. But I think this report is really a landmark and shows that every country, including us, is affected by some form of malnutrition. And there's no one solution to all, but progress is achievable, and it's not easy, but it can be done. And we know in Finland from our own experience, with a country of a history of a lot of nutritional problems, but also a history of a lot of interventions, some successful, some not so. And what we feel is that one of the key challenges really is that the scope of the malnutrition is so broad that it's sometimes really difficult to see. Fat lady on the street may look well nourished, but suffer from anemia, hypertension, diabetes. And the child that is born low weight may die early, but if she or he survives, he's more likely to get diabetes, hypertension, NCDs. So the susceptibility to diseases increases with the undernutrition. So it's really, really complex issue. And the burden of malnutrition is a real challenge. But I think this report and the policy briefs give us a very good picture where we are, what are the bottlenecks, where should we go, and what are the opportunities. And I was really told to take up 3 points, which I would like to emphasize, and I start with the political will. Because I think the key issue to change is really to have political will and long-term commitment. And we should shout loudly that good nutrition is investment for the future of the nation, not just a cost. I think that's very, very important for leaders. And as the report shows, good nutrition is foundation for sustainable development, returns are high, and especially investing on children is very cost effective. I think the figure you showed us that every single coin you invest, you'll get 16 coins back is really important. This is a message we need to convey to political leaders. And I would also like to see much more calculations of cost and returns in the future reports, because money talks, and it talks especially when you talk to political leaders. I mean, we would like to talk about rights and health and that, and they are all important, but in the end, when you want to make changes, they always ask about this issue, so it can't be pushed away. And of course, there are very many ways to improve child nutrition, and I just tell one example from my country. Support and guidance on nutrition is currently a part of all preventive services offered at maternity and child health clinics. As attending these services is also linked to some social benefits, like baby box gift from the government, practically all families use them, almost 100%. And now you're looking at me and saying that Finland is a rich country, and this is something that rich countries only do. But when we started the system, it wasn't so. We had a very, very high infant mortality rate, and the undernutrition was very common, especially in the eastern part of Finland, where about 1/3 of the children were undernourished. So we started that when we saw the problem. And in the beginning, the key focus was to follow growth and weight and height, but gradually it became more complex, more extensive in the field of nutrition. And currently our infant mortality is very, very low. Undernutrition don't exist in practice, but instead, unfortunately, we are dealing with other problems like obesity and overweight. Which brings me to my other key point. That is the importance of healthy food habits in preventing double burden of malnutrition. Food is more than nutrients. I mean, iron, folic acid supplementation, these are all important, but they are not enough. And bad dietary habits cannot be compensated by supplements. And we need to make sure that the food environment is health promoting. And in practice, we need a lot of strategies. We need to improve access to healthy options and make them available, affordable, desirable. And we also need to limit and protect children from exposure to foods that are detrimental to health, high in salt, sugar, hard fats. We should have really a lot of tools, approaches in our toolbox. And collecting data on that is also important and challenging. And I have one wish for the next report. Please cover dietary habits better. I know there are challenges, like you mentioned, but that is really important. And I would also like to see more NCD-related items reported, like salt. We have accepted very, very ambitious goal to reduce salt intake globally by 30% in United Health Assembly, but we don't know how we are doing. What kind of actions are ongoing and successful? Could this be a topic for next report? Likewise, reporting on interventions that focus on promoting balanced diets would be important. And my final point, I think we need to make nutrition more visible and communicate the message better. We need to do it in the health sector, but also mainstream nutrition in other sectors like agriculture, education, and development. We have an important momentum here now with the ICN2 meeting behind and the implementation of commitments ahead, including also processes about nutrition-related sustainable development goals that we covered in an earlier talk. We must not lose this moment. And we must also look critically at our own policies. We did a pilot study in Finland looking at the coherence of our own policies last year and found out that we could do better. One of the recommendations of this pilot study was that food security and nutrition goals should be much better incorporated as a part of development objectives, in cooperation with sectors like education, health, and environment. And we also need to develop health impact assessment of policies relevant to food and nutrition security. And I finish by giving one more example of the powerful nutrition intervention that can have widespread benefits: healthy school food. We started giving school food to children more than 60 years ago, when we found out that many children were undernourished and couldn't concentrate on studying. Meal provision had many beneficial effects. It improved child health, school attendance rates, and even helped women to find employment outside food. Above all, a child that is not hungry learns better and has a better future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sirpa, and thank you for that very strong health promotion message that on the one hand, the environment can contribute to food and nutrition and health, but also health can be a basis and nutrition can be a basis for other sectors, like your school example, to complete their own goals better. We agreed that I will not share with you in great length the bios of our very distinguished panel, and a very distinguished panel it is. You have the bios available to you, and you did see that Sirpa is an advisor of the Ministry and Deputy Director of the Health Promotion Unit at the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health in Finland. We now go to Josephine Ipe. She is a Ugandan national who currently works with UNICEF, Office of Emergency Programs, Geneva, as a senior advisor and Global Nutrition Cluster Coordinator. And she will focus on the issue that in a world in crises, when we talk about nutrition, there is an increasingly large population, groups of populations who do not have access to nutrition, who basically don't have access to food for that matter. Please, Josephine, your 3 key messages.
Thank you very much, and I would like to really appreciate the people who contributed to the development of this compilation of this report. And more so, as has been mentioned, my focus currently is on the humanitarian part of nutrition work. And normally we get left out in this kind of launch. So I'm really honored to be here and also to be invited to represent the group that I represent. And as has been mentioned, nutrition issues are huge in emergency situations, and we get to struggle with it year in and year out. And therefore, for me, having a report like this which consolidates the situation, the actions that needs to be taken, policy issues and so on, is something that goes a long way in not only addressing the longer-term development issues in nutrition, but also the humanitarian response. And to that effect, my key messages are the following. One is emergency preparedness and response should, in the context of this report and also what we do, should really form part of the national nutrition program. At the moment, when you read the report, the emphasis on emergency preparedness and response, or resilience, or how communities could be prepared so that subsequent emergencies they can resist it, is not that strong. So my key message here is basically to foster that relationship and to ensure that in the forthcoming report that is made explicit and addressed. And this could be done through support in participation between the 2 groups of people. Development and emergency have been in a number of launches and so on, but we are always in our own group. So it's really important to ensure that we promote this linkage and cross-learning. The second issue then I have is in terms of resource allocation, also promoting and making sure that countries allocate resources to emergency preparedness and also response. Finally, within the report, my suggestion would be in the next report, could there be a question like how to assess how many countries include preparedness in their national nutrition program plan. Evaluate the effectiveness of how they allocate resources, and also whether these resources are internal or from government. The second key point I have is in terms of government leadership and coordination, which is core to what I do in emergency setting. The reason why this is important is in emergency setting, normally we look at coordination solutions, but that coordination solution needs to be embedded within an existing government structure so that it's built on sustainable, we build sustainable coordination structure. I remember, Lawrence, you did talk about the good example in Ethiopia. And if we look back at the years of Ethiopia's, how the nutrition program developed, over time, government took responsibility and ensured that the overall coordination of nutrition, including the emergency component, is built within a structure that is sustainable. So my point is, how do we ensure that that exists so that that will be a building block for us when push comes to shove and emergency happens? This link to this is the linkage between SAN initiative and the emergency initiatives, ICN, REACH, and all these initiatives. We should not be confusing countries. Yeah, we should be coming together and building on what is there rather than various, entities coming to, with the information and so to government. Finally, my final message is around integrated approach to nutrition response during emergencies. This is important because in the emergency nutrition sphere, we focus on the management of acute malnutrition. But as indicated here, it's very important that we ensure the other programs, micronutrients, infant and young child feeding, and so on, are also addressed, as well as intersectoral linkages. And most importantly, how to ensure that these programs are implemented at scale. So these are my 3 key points, and thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Josephine. And those of you that have followed the Ebola response and all the issues that came in the wake of the Ebola outbreak will know how absolutely critical those points are that Josephine made, and that it took quite some time until people again realized how much food and nutrition measures were part of the response. We now move on to Mark van Ameringen, who is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, that most of you know under the word GAIN. He has also a significant track record on building partnerships across the public and the private sector for better nutrition. Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lona. I mean, first of all, as part of the stakeholder group discussing this for many months, and I know many of us were really not sure where this was going to go, and a lot of us thought that Lawrence and his team pulled a rabbit out of the hat by coming up with such a strong report, and I think it's really a milestone in the sense that it, for the first time, gives us kind of a baseline for the sector as a whole, and that's something that we've never had before. And it's imperfect, but it does lay out some of the priorities, it lays out some of the gaps, and it gives us some very powerful messages that we did not have before. And I think also, the timing is perfect with this year and the focus on the SDGs. I think from where I sit, the 2 key recommendations out of the many that come out of this is that, for the first time, we're treating malnutrition as a global problem. It's not just poor countries, and it's not just around undernutrition. It's really acknowledging for the first time that it's a global problem. and it affects most countries in some way, and I think the report shows that. But the second part, I think, which is really important, is that it puts the accountability issue at the sector level, not leaving it to different stakeholders pushing this issue, but actually saying it's a sector issue, and it's an issue it's not just the private sector issue, it's governments, it's donors, it's civil society. And I think that is a breakthrough for this sector. I think maybe there are a few areas I would highlight as we go to the next report that we do need to try and figure out how we deal with. I mean, one of those would be the whole area of addressing adolescent girls, which is I think of the last few Lancet series around maternal undernutrition have been pointing more and more that we have to look at the 1,000 days, but also before the 1,000 days. And as we take on this agenda, it's not just in the nutrition space. It's very much around gender equity. It's around delaying marriage and childbearing. It's around education. So it cuts across not just neatly our nutrition specific and sensitive, it actually picks up a broader development goal and where we need more integrated approaches. So I think that's one big issue I think that we have to figure out how to deal with. The other, I think it's great that we've talked about in the report the new normal as undernutrition as well as overweight and obesity, but the report mainly speaks to undernutrition. It doesn't really say a lot about overweight and obesity. And I think it's hard because we don't have a strong evidence framework and we don't have a lot of data. But I think in this, just given the global attention on overweight and obesity, we need to balance it out more in the next report to really build out, a framework and to try and map out also where are the people that we're trying to reach. The third thing I would say is, and Lawrence picked it up already, is the report says a lot about stakeholders in government, it says a lot about donors, a lot about civil society. It's fairly silent on the private sector. I know there wasn't enough time to deal with this, but I think it's important that we not shy away from this issue because it's complicated and it's difficult. I mean, I think a lot of the easy parts of it, I think we can deal with. Certainly under the nutrition for growth commitments by the private sector, I think we got some handle on what is there. But there's a big issue around the private sector where it's, perhaps doing more harm than around nutrition. We need to be able to speak to that, and also where it's playing a very positive impact. So, I think it's something we have to dig into. There will be a new Access to Nutrition Index, I think, between now and the next report, which will give us a new set of rankings, hopefully on the private sector. But I do think this is a very key area, and if we don't capture this in the accountability equation, we'll be missing a big pillar. I think the other thing I thought the report shied away from, I think rightly in this one, but should not in the next one, is really looking at our own governance in the sector. How are we doing? We have multiple initiatives. We have the Sun, we have Zero Hunger, we have a lot of other things going on. Is the governance, is it helping? Is it going in the right direction? We should be looking at that. And I think a lot of that came out at the ICN2 meeting. And I think this also relates a bit to, I think we have to draw a closer line of sight between where all the investments are going, particularly from the outside donors, and where we're seeing the impacts. And I think as we start to see more engagement around and more traction around national nutrition plans and their scale up, we should be able to draw some link between the evidence and the investment, which right now is very hard to see that. But I think I'll stop here. I mean, I think this is as a first report, it's fantastic. It really moves us. I presented the report last week in Davos, and particularly some of the recommendations around getting this more in the new Sustainable Development Goals. And I think one reaction from the private sector was, well, we already have too many goals. You know, why would we want to add more goals and more targets? Then the counterpoint was, in fact, Amina Mohammed, who's actually the special advisor to the Secretary General for the post-2015 agenda. And her comment was, nutrition is fundamental to this. That's why it's number 2 in the Open Working Group report. And, you know, she's going to push for it, but we really need to advocate. And I think that was one of the points of the report already. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark, for those very helpful suggestions, and particularly for addressing the issue of industry and the private sector. You know, as we move forward in this area, there is big potential. There are also big problems. Just think of the sugar debate that has also hit the executive board at its opening, and other such issues. It's also the link to, of course, the large agenda of sustainable production and consumption, and how we organize many of the issues around agriculture, food production, and other things. And there again, there's an interface that Mark alluded to that is very important. So our last speaker on the panel is Patricia Francasi. She is Senior Nutrition Analyst and Strategy Advisor in the Sun Movement, that is scaling up nutrition, and a member of the independent expert group for this nutrition report as well. So Patricia, your 3 points, please.
Thank you. So first of all, as a member of the independent expert group, I would like to mention how incredible it is to be part of this network of people. We are really benefiting from the leadership of Lawrence, but also being part of this network confirms that nutrition is a multidisciplinary matter that requires a continuously informed and adaptive assessment. The report effectively brings together people with different backgrounds, representing a huge variety of institutions. And this inclusive process really is reflected by the richness of the data, the case studies, and also the actionable recommendation. So without a doubt, this report encourages all of us to become more ambitious. So during 2015, a number of countries in the Sun Movement will embark upon the ambitious effort of reporting on nutrition-relevant budget allocations. This is not an issue or an end in itself. More, it is linked with identifying context-specific causes of malnutrition. It highlights the very key challenge of agreeing on outcomes that are relevant to nutrition so that investments in different sectors can become more effective. We are really thankful that countries are using this as an opportunity for dialogue with different sectors on their programs. We are grateful they are aiming to collect and collate financial figures which are transparent and comparable over time. We all want quality data, but these data do not come ready-made. Access and use of data require the building of trust as the only true basis for sharing and collaborating. So the Sun Movement, which is not an initiative, but it's more of an open space, really tries to cultivate that trust so that everyone can foster alliances for improved nutrition. We see the Global Nutrition Report as more than just a report. It is, in fact, a great engine for change. This report demonstrates that malnutrition is indeed a global cause for concern, and therefore one for unified action. There are no countries with a monopoly on nutrition problems, just as there are no countries with a monopoly on nutrition solutions. And this is really coming up very well from the report. So here we are at the start of the 21st century. We can be thankful that we are now able to collectively view the challenges we have in common. So we should recognize this as a unique opportunity. So it's really, my last message is about working together as we accelerate global progress on nutrition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Over to you for comments, questions, issues you'd like to raise to the panel. We have microphones roving somewhere. Yes, so there is a lady back there, please. And please introduce yourself and short statements, please, or questions.
My name is Judith Richter. I have been working on corporate accountability issues for quite a number of years. And my question is about language. UNRIS, the UN Research Institute in Social Development, pointed out a long time ago that the model of public-private partnerships and multi-stakeholder initiatives carries a language which does something to us. It does erase the difference between actors, and one can see how it has shifted. It started, stakeholder was a term which was used to tell corporations to take account of people who may be harmed by them. Meanwhile, we have a discourse which says we cannot leave them out anymore of decision-making processes in the name of a principle of inclusiveness. So I'm worried to see that Sun has produced a paper on conflicts of interest which actually redefines conflicts of interest to fit this model and says that we have to be inclusive because this is the only good governance. So my question to the panel is it possible to work on nutrition without using the word stakeholder?
Oh, there you go. So I'd like to collect a couple of statements and questions. Thank you, Judith, for that. Come on, you can't all be so tired. So I'll go here and then I'll go there. Okay, there's a lady here.
Hi, my name is Elena Matska. I work
and
with
maybe the other mic can already walk over there, or?
I work with the NCD Alliance, and we work a lot in post-2015. And we've heard from Lawrence, we've heard from Mark that we should really focus on more ambitious targets in the future development agenda. And I understand, though, that as we are starting the intergovernmental negotiations, there's very little appetite to reopen the framework as it is. And so I would like to hear from you more on what advocates can concretely do to achieve more ambitious nutrition targets in the future framework.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Lida Alhotska. I work for the International Baby Food Action Network. I have a couple of pointed questions, I hope. First one is, I really miss some kind of an elaboration on the issue of human rights in the report. We were talking accountability, especially Lawrence, you were talking about accountability. And I think the accountability framework around the right to adequate food and nutrition is probably the strongest we have, including also the voluntary guidelines that the FAO or the Committee on the World Food Security is following up on. And I just find it a real pity to always say we have to tell governments, you know, this is going to be great for your money sort of interest. But we are not calling on them in terms of their own human rights accountability. And we are not calling on accountability in terms of human rights on the business sector either. So my question is, will the next report be centered around human rights? Because the ICN2 outcome documents are touching on them totally inadequately. The second point is, when we are looking at business commitments, can we also look at the commitment of not doing certain things? For example, stopping certain harmful marketing practices. And third question is perhaps directed to Mark. You say we should be looking at our own governance. What do you mean by that, linked to the question of the previous speaker? Governance, is it something that we worry about in terms of the stakeholderization of the current governance and conflicts of interest, or in what sense did you mean we should be looking at our own governance? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I must tell the audience there was quite an effort to have a human rights representative on the panel. It didn't work out. So thank you very much for taking that issue up. Any other voices? Yes, Jonathan, please.
I'm Professor Jonathan Patz from the University of Wisconsin. On sabbatical here working with you a lot.
I do remember you, yes. We're getting the mic too.
Thank you. Thank you. Jonathan Patz from the University of Wisconsin. So when I look at the report, I have some concern when nutrition is viewed in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Now, historically, agriculture is the #1 human activity that has changed the Earth's surface more than any other activity. That in itself is not a problem. My concern is the lack of a connection between nutrition and sustainability of terrestrial and marine ecosystems. In fact, in the report in table 2.2, there's an even a not applicable to those domains, which really shocked me. So finally, let me give you an example. When you think about consumer demand for responsibly grown soy products or meat products, where there's certification that these products come from farms that have not engaged in deforestation, I think that's extremely important. So my question is, how can we enhance the focus on sustainable and equitable food production, especially when you think of future generations in mind?
Thank you very much. So we'll go to the panel now for some responses. We're a bit tight on time. And please stay on if you have questions to specific panelists and ask them after we have ended. We'll get responses, and then we will have a presentation from the WHO, and we'll end around 8:10. We start at 6:10, so we'll be exactly 2 hours. So maybe, Patricia, you want to start? You were asked some issues around the Sun movement. And
stakeholder.
Yes, please.
So can we work on nutrition without mentioning stakeholder? Why not? I mean, if we all focus on common results for improved nutrition, we can really talk more about what we aim to achieve. And maybe we don't talk about stakeholder. That could be an answer. I mean, it's very difficult to not talk about stakeholder, because when you have different people around the table, they represent different institutions, they have different background. Also, they have different disciplines and different competence. So, I mean, we use multi-stakeholder platform just to describe the variety of people that in country are engaged around the nutrition. So you have representative from the government, but even within the government, you have different ministries. And not only different ministries, but you have level of government. So you may have the executive power, you may have people from line ministries, increasingly, hopefully, people from province, So that's one domain. Then you have the UN agencies, and among them you have different UN, then you have the civil society, and then increasingly in many countries you have also business. So I don't know if I didn't get the question, but it's very difficult to not talk about
there is a complexity there, because many people, of course, think that the notion of stakeholder, and Judith spoke about stakeholderization, actually tends to sort of gloss over difference of interests and power, and that it implies that the language starts to change our thinking. So I wonder, Sirka, you in Finland, do you use this kind of wording? Do you use that terminology? How do you speak about these things?
Thank you. That's an interesting question, because, of course, when we are operating in the different languages, the words have different connotations, and we are quite careful in the terminology we use in our country. And, for example, the word partnership, when you are discussing nutrition and working with the stakeholders, it's a word we are not using, because we think the goals come from the government and from the health sector, and if we work with somebody else, it's not a partnership in that sense. But these are tricky issues, because they are linked to the language we are using, and I feel always a little bit uncomfortable in dealing with English, because you don't always know the history of the term. But I think it's very important to somehow define the roles and the responsibilities and where they lie, and therefore, for example, the partnership in my mind means equal. And are you equal if you are dealing with the industry? I don't think so. So it's a tricky issue. But now that I have a floor, can I comment on something else?
Yes, please.
Because I think the issue of sustainability that was brought up is very, very important, and it's very close to link to the issue I mentioned earlier about the diets and healthy diets. Because what we should be advocating is really healthy and sustainable diet, and it sounds complex, but actually they are very much in line with each other. If you think about what kind of diet is good for the planet, a lot of plants, a lot of locally grown food is also the diet that is good for the environment. And one of the problems nowadays is that we all, including developing countries, are importing more and more foods we don't need. We are eating more sweets and soft drinks, and we're eating more meat, we are eating more fat. That's, from the sustainability point of view, is not good, and it's not good for the health. And I think these two should be much, much more brought together. And when I mentioned earlier that I would like to see much more about the diet here, I very much welcome having sustainability from the environmental perspective as one of the components incorporated. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark.
I think we have to look back at the nutrition sector and its history a bit, and remember that a lot of the reason nutrition didn't go anywhere for 2 decades was because it was highly fragmented, and every meeting that you went to, every global meeting, there were a lot of people who were walking out of the room, or many people who were not allowed to come into the room. And so, against that backdrop, there has been a big push to build multi-stakeholder platforms that to crowd everyone in. I don't think it prevents the recognition that there are very fundamental different interests. One just needs to go to the civil society group and see the agenda being pushed there, or other groups. So I think we do have to be careful that we're not glossing over the fundamentally different interests. But I do think it's one of the reasons the sector has moved forward is because the Sun and other initiatives have created a platform to crowd people in, not to return to the process of forcing people out who you didn't agree with. So so that's one point. I think on the governance issue, the only issue I'm raising is that we do have to look at all the initiatives that are going on and how well they all line up together and how functional they are all work. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying something more ominous than that. I really do agree strongly with the point about that we do need to look, particularly this year with the climate agreement coming, that we do need to link much more nutrition to ecosystems and food systems, and we really do need to put on the agenda, what is a sustainable, affordable, nutritious diet? What does that look like for the globe? Because I think they are at odds. They're not necessarily synonymous, that they go together. So I do think it's definitely, as we go into the next report, this should be highlighted in some way.
Thank you. And you might have heard that some people have started to use the term planetary health to actually try and bring those dimensions together. Josephine, any points from your side from the issues that were raised from the floor that you'd like to add?
I think on the issue of, the terminology in terms of whether we use stakeholder or partnership, I think the emphasis should be more on, what exactly do the various individuals or the bodies that we are talking about represent. And also issues around conflict of interest need to be clearly, explored and understood. But I really think within the humanitarian context, we use the word partnership more than stakeholders. But I think it depends on what you mean by that. I have one additional comment around ambitious targets and what advocacy can do. I really, when I read through the report, I think there's a lot that needs to be done if we are to achieve those targets that are set there. I was talking with the MSF colleague who has just left about the target for global acute malnutrition rate, which has to be reduced to 5%. When you look at the kind of countries that we deal with, your baseline is 30% or so. And really coming down to 5% is a huge challenge. So I think the emphasis should be around, yes, we can advocate to government and to the various stakeholders, but what do we need to put in place to be able to get to those targets? I think are the emphasis we need to put rather than just the advocacy for advocacy's sake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last words. You have, great challenges to. Everyone said, "Great, we've started on this road. Now we want all these things in the next report, and we want it in all the SDGs." So, what do we do next?
That's where I leave the room screaming. Yeah. Any of you who are old enough and know music, like music a lot, you'll know about the difficult second album syndrome. So expectations have been raised. We'll rise to the challenge. I'd like to thank my panelists. Great comments. We will have a chapter on business. We will have a chapter on sustainable diets. I'm not just making this up. We will. We've got the plan. The consultation has been in. We've got the feedback. It's posted on the website. You can look at it yourself. We're not going to have a chapter on SAM and acute humanitarian issues, but we're going to do more on that. I'm talking with ENN and UNICEF as well, and it'd be great to talk to the GNC as well. So, I just wanted to come back to some of the questions on the floor. I think Judith's comments, you kind of mixed up lots of different things. You mixed up stakeholders and partners and priority setting. Those are the three things that I picked up from what you said. I think everyone has a stake in nutrition. Businesses have a stake in nutrition. They're a stakeholder because they can choose to kill off their customers, they can choose to kill off their employees, or they can choose the longer and medium-term view of actually growing their customers literally and economically and doing the same for their employees. So I think they are stakeholders. I think the issues that you're talking about revolve around power and revolve around transparency. And you see it, but that's not unique to nutrition. You see it, the WTO. I see that the 20th anniversary of the WTO is here. Any of you have been to trade negotiations, you see Finland, the US, your country, Judith, with a phalanx of lawyers, and Sierra Leone with one lawyer trying to negotiate a treaty. So power is everywhere in development, and it's in nutrition. So I think the best thing is to avoid the deals in the corridors and bring that into the open. The key to all of it is governance, transparency and governance and rules of the game. So we can agree to disagree. I also agree with you, however, on I don't think businesses should be in the business of setting priorities. Absolutely not. That's a public health issue, that we elect people, or most of us elect people, and that's their job, is to set those priorities. They can bring businesses in to help deliver some of that stuff, maybe. Depends on the context, depends on the culture, depends on lots of things. I just don't think you can be absolutist about a lot of the business stuff. You're shaking your head. We can talk about it later. Maybe later. What I heard you say was PPP's language does something to us. I also am not crazy about the partnership language. I agree with you, because it implies an equity that's not there. It depowers the relationships. My favorite quote from a colleague at IDS was, we should talk about women's empowerment, because women's empowerment always misses out the power. So, I'm with you on some, but not all of your comments. And on the stuff around right to food and legislation about breast milk substitutes, it's in there. The country profiles, each one of the countries, the 193, there's a policy section, and we use the how quickly are they, how well are they adhering to the legislation, that's the code. Sorry, how well are they adhering to the code, each country, and what do they, where are they in terms of the strength of their right to food? It's not featured a lot in the report. It's summarized in the report, but in the country profiles, which are on the website, there's 193 of them. We couldn't put them in the report. They're there. Now, we could make a bigger deal of them, and we will do that in the next report. The HANSI index, the Hunger and Nutrition Commitment Index, there's 22 indicators, and those two are in there with other indicators. So we will do more. Human rights probably won't be the basis for the report, but it probably will be a basis for the report, because I think we have to hit lots of different audiences. People are influenced and persuaded by different things, so I think we have to have a balanced report in that regard. And I think the idea of stopping certain things is a really good thing. We will be digging into the ATNI indicators. ATNI collect 200 indicators for each company, and we'll be digging into those a bit more. There won't be a new ATNI report in time for 2015, but we're going to look at the 2013 data and expose that to sunlight a bit more. Appetite to achieve ambitious targets. What can we actually do? What are concrete steps to do that? Well, I think we're doing it. The Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is a part of it's a part of the UN, well, it's an adjunct to the UN process, has going through a big consultation. The consultation draws to an end on January the 31st. So if you want to influence the proposal in this Sustainable Development Solution Network, they have proposed going from 169 targets to 100. And we are in, and there's 3 nutrition ones actually in there already. Stunting, wasting, women's anemia. There's another one in there. I can't remember what it is right now. And we are working closely with them to get all 6 WHA indicators in there, and nutrition spending and women's diet diversity score. That's the piece of paper that our SCN colleagues were waving around. That's gone into that process. So I think we are doing some things, but all of us can do some very tangible things. In terms of the actual targets, I think WHO and UNICEF are working on this, or thinking about working on this. I'm not sure where they are. I'm hoping to catch up with them later today on this. Okay. And finally, on this nutrition and sustainability, I will look at that row of the table. I'll be mortified if you're right. I will look at it. I was looking at, I did a blog about the Tillman and Clark paper that you must be familiar with in Nature. Is Nature or Science? I forget which one. Late last year. I think we can do more on that, because diet choices, of course, do affect carbon footprints and GHG emissions, and they do affect healthy outcomes. I think the bigger issue, well, not the bigger issue, but the policy issue is how do you get any movement towards healthy diets? I think that's very difficult, and I think it's all about the environmental prompts that are very powerful towards sugar, salt, meat, and fat. And Boyd Swinburne is joining our group, and he's an expert in this area. So thank you for identifying that. It's a mistake if it's missing.
Thank you very much, and let's say thanks to our panel. So as the panel leaves the podium, I was told there was a representative here from Brazil. who wanted to draw attention to the next conference on nutrition for growth. Is somebody here? No, maybe they couldn't make it. So you know next year, this year? Next year. Maybe Lawrence, if you say a word about that conference, just that people know.
This whole set of, some of this was set in motion at the 2012 Olympics, and there was an idea to have a big marker in the 2016 Olympics in Brazil. So the second report will come out at the UNGA in September, and the third report will come out at the time of the Nutrition for Growth conference in Brazil, which will be a big stocktake of, has this 4 million materialized and have these commitments been kept?
Thank you very much, Lawrence. We're not ending now, so don't all run away. We have one more presentation by the WHO, and I'm delighted that Francesco Branca, who is the WHO Director of the Department of Nutrition for Health and Development, will give us some briefing on the efforts to scale up progress towards the global nutrition targets. Francesco, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ilona. And I thought I was going to give you some food for thought, but since it's actually very much past dinner time, at least for Geneva standards, I think I'm just going to give you a couple of ideas to make your dreams better. So since we're close to dinner, to sleeping time. Okay. So what I would like to show you is, again, the targets. And you heard that somehow these targets have mobilized interest of the national and international communities because they are scoping the nutrition challenges and are indicating what we can realistically achieve. But we want to be more ambitious, so can we dream about being more ambitious? So that's my first suggestion for a dream. Dream to be more ambitious over the 6 targets. Is that possible? These targets were approved by the 194 members of the World Health Organization at the World Health Assembly in 2012. And I can assure you it was not an easy discussion because they said, we're never going to achieve it. So they felt that mapping what the successful countries have done would be a good measure of what can be achieved. And still you heard we're not on track. So how can we be more ambitious? What is the recipe there? Well, certainly we would like to see countries becoming a bit more concrete about their achievements. So they themselves have to, each one of them have to set their own targets. And then they must find a menu of actions, policies, programs, investments. They need to know how to do that. So we thought from the point of view of the organizations that are working in development and trying to help these countries, can we give them a simple menu? And sometimes, I agree with Lawrence, when you speak to policymakers, you can't provide them with long, detailed documents. You need to be pretty synthetic. And you have your 1-minute elevator speech for them. So we have produced 6 1-minute elevator speech for the policymakers. Read them, they're in the room, outside there. And I'm not going to read those elevator speech now because I don't have the 6 minutes. But I just would like to tell you that the way we've developed them is really with in consultation with countries, trying to look at their experience, trying to inform the recommendation on the evidence. What needs to be done? Of course, this has to be based to a certain extent on the evidence of effectiveness. But a lot of it, actually, particularly in what we call the nutrition-sensitive development, is not been described in a way that really can make it into our recommendations or guidelines. So it's experience-based, but it has a lot of wisdom there to then say, okay, we can give you some good ideas on how to reduce stunting, on how to reduce anemia, on how to reduce low birth weight, on how to reduce child overweight, one of the most difficult ones. How to improve breastfeeding rates and how to keep wasting as low as possible. A lot of them have a combination of actions. I mean, you have to be able to use the health system to deliver interventions at scale, and we know which interventions we need to deliver. We need to be able to work with the other sectors, and we've been able to say what the other sectors can do. So we have good asks for each of the sectors. And now we have also a system to help countries set their targets and monitor their targets and see whether they are on track or not. It's a simple system. It goes on the internet, and we have it for most of the targets except low birth weight, which is a bit more difficult one. So in a sense, that can be, maybe you can talk about that tomorrow morning once you're woken up from your dream and see whether this can really be implemented and what it takes to implement. That's the important thing, what it takes to implement. I think we need to be clear about what it takes. I'm very happy that we're now saying, well, malnutrition is for all the countries and you have multiple forms of malnutrition. I must say it's an achievement of the last few years of discussion in the nutrition community. And I'm very pleased that that was the leitmotif of the International Conference of Nutrition. It was a big deal. And I think, and that's my second dream for you, the ICN2 is not the end of the story. In fact, it's supposed to be the start of this story. If we want to achieve those dreams, well, I can tell you that we had over 2,000 people sharing that dream with you. And we had a lot of high-level people, some of them were more inspiring than others, or you may be inspired by some of them more than others. But certainly they were all visionary about what we can do collectively in nutrition. So we have a vision. We have a vision for a world free from malnutrition. It's a big vision. It's not zero hunger only. It's a world free from malnutrition. It's about having really a diversified, balanced, healthy diet. It's about having all sectors working for this goal. It's about having consumers, people who are empowered to make their choices. It's about women who receive special attention. The outcome of the ICN2 was a document called the Rome Declaration with 10 commitments. So you're right, Lawrence, we can track commitments. They've been made. Some of the commitment can be seen as a bit general, and I agree, these political discussions are always, the minimum common denominator that you can find among all member states. But we also have a document called the Framework for Action, which is actually a bit more specific. It has 60 policy and program options. He said it's voluntary. We do not commit to all 60 of them. Fair enough. But, we now have charted policy recommendation for each of the sectors. That's the first time we have that. We do not only have the effective intervention in health, we have a bit more about food system, sustainable, by the way. We have something about international trade and investment. We have social protection. We have water, sanitation and hygiene. We have food safety. So we now have the tracking, the possibility to track all these different sectors. I think we need another step, which is to pin down the countries and ask them, okay, which of the 60 actions you are going to commit to? And we're going to do that. And that will be the basis of a good accountability system. This is the famous scorecard of the indicators. It's outside there, but I put it up here. I think it's true, and that's the third dream I'm asking you to have. I think in a night, one can have multiple dreams. They're connected sometimes, but so 3 is good enough. So the third dream is, yes, to have a bit more than a single indicator of nutrition in the SDGs. I think what we have now is not enough. is again talking only about to the undernutrition, and is again, confining the nutrition into a small subset of, well, unfortunately not small, but in a subset of the countries. In order to make really nutrition a global achievement, we need this set. So talk to your people, as Lawrence was saying, dream about it, but tomorrow morning, wake up, sit down, and start writing emails to the right people. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you, Francesco, for this very precise close-up, and I think one should have the next picture because it gives us a bit of optimism. So thank you very much for coming. I hope this was a useful briefing and launch for you so that you can see what is happening. You've also received very clear materials for your advocacy. You've been able to give some messages for the next report, and particularly issues related also to the commercialization of our food, but also messages related to the interface of a broader sustainable production and consumption, and relating environmental development issues with our health and food development issues. So thank you very much. I won't go into any other great roundups. The only thing we might perhaps dream about that we don't need elevator speeches anymore, because we'll all be walking up the stairs instead. That'll give you a little bit more time. Okay, have a lovely evening.